The holographic display shimmered, rendering the Northgate Park demolition schematics in a blood-red overlay. Julian Croft, silhouetted against the penthouse window that overlooked the city he owned in all but name, swirled amber liquid in a crystal glass. The ice clinked, a lonely sound in the sterile expanse of his home. "Finalize it, Marcus," he said, his voice flat. On the screen, a small window showed a live feed of the park, a final, sentimental look before its erasure. Marcus's voice, filtered through the room's speakers, was hesitant. "Sir, there's an interaction you should see. Quad B7. Julian's finger, poised to authorize the billion-dollar transaction, paused. "Interaction?" He magnified the feed. A tiny girl, no older than 7, with a riot of dark curls and a worn, oversized gray sweater, was cornered by 3 boys twice her size. The leader, a thick-necked boy with a sneer that was probably a family heirloom, shoved her. She stumbled back but didn't fall. Julian sighed, bored. Another playground squabble, the mundane cruelty of children. He was about to close the feed when the girl looked up. No tears. Her small face was unnervingly calm, her dark eyes holding the boy's gaze with an intensity that felt ancient. Her voice, miraculously clear on the parabolic mic array his security team had installed, was not a child's plea. It was a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devastating. "Your father left because of your mother's drinking," she said, her tone level, almost conversational. "Your mother drinks because she's ashamed of you." The boy froze, his face a mask of shock and horror. The sneer dissolved into a slack-jawed vulnerability. His 2 cronies glanced at each other, their bravado evaporating in the face of such a specific, brutal truth. The girl didn't press her advantage. She simply held his gaze for another second, then bent down, picked up a scattered handful of acorns she had apparently been collecting, and walked away, disappearing behind a large oak tree. The lead bully stood motionless, a statue of crumbling arrogance, before he finally turned and ran, his friends trailing uselessly behind him. Julian leaned forward, the glass forgotten in his hand, the ice melting against his warm fingers. The demolition order, the billion-dollar deal, the entire skyline outside his window. It all faded into white noise. He heard the thudding of a strange, forgotten rhythm in his chest. It was his own heart. "Marcus," he whispered, the sound alien in the silent room. "Cancel the demolition order, indefinitely, and find out who she is. Now." The silence that followed was broken only by the faint hum of the server banks in the next room. Marcus, a man who had flawlessly executed commands to bankrupt companies and ruin political careers without a single question, was speechless for a full 10 seconds. "Sir, you heard me," Julian said, his eyes still locked on the empty space behind the oak tree on the screen. "I want a full workup. Name, age, family, school, where she lives. Everything. And I want it an hour ago." He closed the holographic display with a flick of his wrist, plunging the room into the dim twilight offered by the city below. He stood there for a long time, the condensation from the glass dripping onto the polished marble floor, his mind replaying not the boy's shocked face, but the unnerving, profound stillness in the little girl's eyes. It was the look of someone who understood suffering, not as a victim, but as a scholar. And for the first time in 15 years, Julian Croft was completely, utterly intrigued. The file arrived on his private server 47 minutes later. It was depressingly thin. Her name was Lily. Just Lily. No surname listed. Age 7. No known family. She was a ward of the state, residing at the Elmwood Home for Children, a crumbling brick monolith on the industrial side of town, precisely the kind of institution his own Croft Foundation wrote off as a lost cause every fiscal year. Her school records from the local public school were a paradox. Perfect attendance, but flagged for social isolation and a tendency to stare out the window. Her test scores were off the charts, placing her in the 99th percentile for linguistic and logical mathematical intelligence. Yet she was in a remedial reading group because she refused to read the assigned material aloud, preferring to devour books from the adult section of the city library during her free time. There were notes from concerned, overworked teachers. Lily seems disconnected. She doesn't play with the other children. Her insights can be unsettling. Unsettling. That was the word. Julian pulled up the satellite imagery of the Elmwood home. It was a scar on the cityscape, a relic of failed social policy, surrounded by a chain-link fence and cracked asphalt. He cross-referenced its address with his own company's real estate holdings. A cold knot formed in his stomach. A subsidiary of Croft Enterprises had purchased the entire block 3 months ago. The demolition permits were already approved. Elmwood and the 50 children inside it were scheduled to be replaced by a luxury condominium complex with a rooftop infinity pool and valet parking. The very project he had nearly greenlit this afternoon was not just erasing a park, it was erasing her. He felt a prickle of something he couldn't name. It wasn't guilt. Guilt was an inefficient emotion, a waste of processing power. This was different. A sense of cosmic misalignment. He, Julian Croft, a man who bent the world to his will, had almost inadvertently crushed this strange, fascinating little creature. He opened a secure channel to Marcus. The Elmwood home. What's the status of our acquisition? Finalized, sir. The City Council approved the zoning variance last week. We're in the final stages of relocating the residents. Relocating. A sterile corporate euphemism for scattering traumatized children across a network of equally underfunded and overburdened facilities. Halt it, Julian said. What? Halt the project. Don't break ground. Don't send eviction notices. Don't do anything. Just freeze it. Sir, the carrying costs alone are substantial. The investors will do what they're told, Julian snapped. I am the investor. Find a loophole, an environmental survey, a historical designation claim, I don't care. Tie it up in red tape until I say otherwise. He cut the connection before Marcus could reply. He paced the length of his penthouse, the city lights a glittering carpet below him. He had built an empire on logic, on ruthless efficiency, on the cold calculus of profit and loss. He had systematically excised emotion from his life after his wife and daughter were taken from him. A casualty of a drunk driver, he later had the satisfaction of financially ruining into oblivion. He had built walls of wealth and technology around himself so that nothing could ever touch him again. And yet, a 7-year-old girl in a worn sweater had just breached them all with a few well-chosen words on a park bench. He couldn't just leave it alone. The scientist in him, the part that had earned him his first fortune in predictive analytics, demanded more data. He needed to understand the variable that was Lily. The next day, he did something he hadn't done in a decade. He went out. Not in his armored Maybach that slid through the city like a phantom, but in a nondescript electric sedan, driven by a junior security officer who was so nervous he kept adjusting his collar. Julian wore a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. He felt like a foreigner in his own city. The air smelled of exhaust and roasted nuts. The sounds were a chaotic symphony of sirens, chatter, and music. It was all so messy, so inefficient. He had the car park a block away from Northgate Park and walked the rest of the way. He found the oak tree from the surveillance feed and sat on a nearby bench, pretending to read a newspaper he'd bought from a street vendor. An hour passed, then another. He was about to give up, annoyed at his own impulsiveness, when he saw her. She was walking alone, a tattered copy of what looked like Marcus Aurelius' Meditations in her small hands. She didn't go to the playground. Instead, she found a secluded spot under a willow tree, her back against the trunk, and began to read. She was completely absorbed, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Julian watched her for what felt like an eternity. He saw other children run past, laughing and shouting, but she paid them no mind. It wasn't that she seemed lonely. She seemed self-contained, a universe of her own. Eventually, a young boy, maybe 5 years old, tripped and fell near her, scraping his knee. He let out a piercing wail. Before a parent could rush over, Lily had closed her book, moved to the boy's side, and was speaking to him in a low, calm voice. Julian was too far away to hear the words, but he could see their effect. The boy's sobs subsided. She helped him up, gently brushed the dirt off his pants, and pointed him back toward the playground. The whole interaction took less than a minute. Then she returned to her book as if nothing had happened. Julian felt that strange thud in his chest again. It was the antithesis of the playground incident. She had used her perception to wound, but here she used it to heal. Who was this child? He stayed until the sky began to bleed into shades of orange and purple. A tired-looking woman, a caregiver from Elmwood he recognized from the file, came to collect her. Lily closed her book, marked her page with a fallen leaf, and left without a backward glance. Julian waited until they were gone, then walked to the spot under the willow tree. He stood there for a moment, looking at the small indentation in the grass where she had sat. He felt an overwhelming, illogical urge to protect that small space, to protect her. It was the most dangerous feeling he had experienced in 15 years. Over the next few weeks, Julian's obsession, for that's what it was, he admitted to himself, grew. He had Marcus install more sophisticated, less visible surveillance in the park. He had a top-tier cybersecurity team do a deep dive into the state's records, searching for any trace of Lily's origins. They found nothing. It was as if she had simply appeared in the system at the age of 2, a foundling with no history. His days took on a new rhythm. In the mornings, he would run his global empire from his penthouse command center, making decisions that shifted markets and altered coastlines. But in the afternoons, he would watch the live feed from Northgate Park. He learned her routines. He learned that she loved acorns, that she was afraid of large dogs, and that she always shared the single sandwich she brought for lunch with the pigeons. He began to intervene, subtly at first. He noticed the library books she checked out were often old and damaged. A few days later, a massive, anonymous donation was made to the city library system, with a specific earmark for new acquisitions in philosophy, physics, and classical literature. The next time Lily went to the library, the shelves were stocked with pristine new volumes. He saw her shivering in her thin sweater as an early autumn wind swept through the park. The following morning, a delivery truck carrying 100 new winter coats, all in different sizes and colors, arrived at the Elmwood home, a gift from a shell corporation that dissolved an hour after the delivery was confirmed. He told himself it was an experiment. He was introducing stimuli into her environment and observing the results. But he knew it was a lie. When he saw her on the video feed, her face lighting up as she pulled a brand new, perfectly fitting red coat from one of the boxes, the feeling he experienced was not scientific detachment. It was a raw, protective warmth that spread through his chest and made his throat feel tight. He was becoming attached. The thought terrified him. Attachment was a liability. It was a weakness. It was the hole in the armor that had allowed the world to hurt him so badly before. He tried to pull back. He went 2 full days without watching the feed. He threw himself into his work, orchestrating a hostile takeover of a German tech firm with a viciousness that made his board of directors flinch. But it was no use. The silence of his penthouse felt heavier, the view from his window less commanding. The world he had built for himself felt like a gilded cage. On the 3rd day, he gave in. He pulled up the live feed, and his blood ran cold. Lily was not in her usual spot. He scanned the park, his heart rate accelerating. He found her near the pond. The same 3 boys from the first day were back, and this time they had her book. The lead bully, whose name Julian had learned was Kevin, was holding her copy of Meditations over the water, a malicious grin on his face. "What's this garbage, weirdo?" Kevin taunted. "Talking to yourself in here?" "It's a book," Lily said, her voice quiet but steady. She stood her ground, her small hands clenched at her sides. "Give it back." "Or what?" Kevin sneered. "You gonna say something mean about my mom again?" He took a step closer. "My dad came back, you know. He said you're a liar." Julian's hand flew to his comms unit. "Marcus, security team to Northgate Park. Now, 5-minute response time." "Sir, it's a playground dispute. Now, Marcus!" Julian roared, his voice echoing in the vast room. On the screen, Kevin opened the book and ripped out a handful of pages, letting them flutter into the murky water. Lily flinched, a flicker of genuine pain crossing her face for the first time. It was as if he had struck her. That was it. The experiment was over. This was no longer about observation. Julian stood up, grabbing a jacket. "Get my car. I'm going down there." "Sir, that's not advisable. Your public profile. I don't give a damn about my public profile," he snarled, already heading for his private elevator. The ride down the 100 stories felt like an eternity. He watched the feed on his phone, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. Kevin and his friends were now shoving Lily, pushing her back and forth between them. She was stumbling, trying to stay on her feet, her face pale but still defiant. She wasn't fighting back. She wasn't crying. She was just enduring. And that, more than anything, broke through the last of Julian's carefully constructed walls. It wasn't her strange intelligence or her unnerving perception that defined her. It was her resilience. The elevator doors opened onto the private garage. His Maybach was waiting, engine humming. He jumped in the back. "Go, Northgate Park. Break every traffic law you need to." The car surged forward into the city streets. Julian watched the screen as the first of his plainclothes security team arrived at the park, moving in with practiced, non-threatening speed. They looked like concerned dads or joggers converging on the scene. "What's going on here, boys?" one of them said, his voice calm but authoritative. Kevin and his friends froze, suddenly confronted by an adult. They dropped the book and scattered like rats. One of the security men knelt by Lily, asking if she was okay. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the tattered remains of her book, now a soggy mess at the edge of the pond. She looked small and defeated. Julian's car screeched to a halt at the park entrance. He didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. He walked toward the pond, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. The security men saw him coming and immediately tensed, trying to subtly form a protective cordon around him. He waved them off with an impatient gesture. His eyes were only on Lily. She was still staring at the ruined book. He stopped a few feet away from her. He hadn't spoken to a child in 15 years. He had no idea what to say. His mind, capable of processing trillions of data points a second, went blank. "Are you all right?" The words came out sounding stiff and formal. She looked up at him. Her dark eyes were wide, taking in his expensive clothes, his aura of power. But there was no fear in her gaze, only curiosity. She didn't answer his question. Instead, she asked one of her own. "Who are you?" she said, her voice a soft murmur. It was a question he hadn't truly considered in a very long time. He was Julian Croft, the titan of industry, the recluse, the architect of a digital empire. But standing in front of this tiny, resilient girl, none of those titles seemed to matter. "My name is Julian," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue. He knelt, an unfamiliar and awkward motion for him, so he was closer to her level. He looked at the destroyed book. "I'm sorry about your book." "It's okay," she said, though her expression said otherwise. "Paper and glue. The words are still in my head." This simple, profound statement struck him with the force of a physical blow. He, who lived in a world of tangible assets, of contracts and buildings and stock certificates, was being reminded that the most valuable things were intangible. He gestured to the soggy mess. Marcus Aurelius, heavy reading for a 7-year-old. A faint smile touched her lips. He's not heavy. He's just quiet. He says the universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Julian felt a chill. She wasn't just reading the words. She understood them. He made a decision. It was impulsive, illogical, and potentially disastrous. It was also the most right thing he had felt in 15 years. "I know a place with more books than you could read in a lifetime," he said. "All of them brand new. No one will ever rip their pages." Lily's eyes widened, a flicker of childish wonder finally breaking through her stoic facade. "Where?" "It's my house," Julian said. Would you like to see it?" He was half expecting her to say no, to be wary of the strange man in the park. Her caregiver was hurrying over now, her face a mixture of alarm and confusion at the sight of the security personnel. But Lily didn't look at her caregiver. She looked at Julian, her gaze searching his face with that unsettling perception. She seemed to see past the wealth and the power, past the carefully constructed walls, and into the vast, empty space he had been living in for so long. She must have seen something there she recognized, or perhaps something she trusted. She gave a small, solemn nod. "Okay," she said. The ride to his penthouse was silent. Lily sat perfectly still in the plush leather seat, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide as she watched the city blur past. The caregiver, a woman named Sarah, sat beside her, wringing her hands and looking utterly terrified. Julian had explained, in the vaguest possible terms, that he was a potential benefactor for the Elmwood home and wanted to speak with one of its residents. It was a flimsy pretext, but his name, once she'd timidly asked for it, was enough to quell any real protest. The name Julian Croft didn't invite arguments. The private elevator ascended with a silent, disorienting speed. When the doors opened directly into his penthouse, Lily's gasp was audible. The living area was a cavern of glass and steel, with ceilings 30 feet high and a panoramic view of the entire city. The furniture was minimalist and severe. The art on the walls was abstract and worth more than the GDP of a small country. It was a space designed to impress and intimidate, not to comfort. "Wow," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's big." Sarah, the caregiver, looked like she was about to faint. She clutched her purse to her chest as if it were a life preserver. Julian ignored them both for a moment, speaking into his wrist comm. "Marcus, I want the file on the boy, Kevin. His family. I want to know everything. Sir, you heard me. I want leverage." He cut the connection and turned back to his guests. The cold ruthlessness of his command hung in the air. He saw a flicker of something in Lily's eyes. Not fear, but disappointment. He felt a sudden, sharp need to justify himself. "They needed to be stopped," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. Lily just looked at him. "You don't stop a fire by burning down the forest," she said quietly. He had no answer to that. He felt like a clumsy giant, a creature of brute force in the presence of something delicate and wise. He cleared his throat, feeling a desperate need to change the subject, to get back on solid ground. "The library," he said, gesturing down a long white corridor. "This way." The library was his sanctuary, the one room in the penthouse that held any real meaning for him. It was 2 stories tall, with floor-to-ceiling shelves made of dark mahogany, filled with thousands of leather-bound first-edition books. A rolling ladder, just like in old movies, was attached to a brass rail that ran along the top. The air smelled of old paper and leather. It was the only place that didn't feel sterile. Lily stopped in the doorway, her eyes scanning the towering walls of books. Her mouth fell open. For the first time since he had seen her, she looked like a normal 7-year-old child, completely and utterly awestruck. She took a tentative step inside, as if entering a sacred temple. She ran her tiny hand along the spines of a row of books, her touch gentle and reverent. "They're all real," she whispered. Julian found himself smiling. A real, genuine smile. The muscles in his face felt stiff from disuse. "Yes, they're all real." She turned to him, her face glowing with a pure, unadulterated joy that was so foreign to his own existence. It was almost painful to witness. Can I read one?" "You can read all of them," he said, the words coming out before he had even thought them through. He watched as she carefully selected a book, a thick volume of Shakespeare's collected works, and found a comfortable-looking leather armchair. The chair was so large she had to climb into it, her small feet dangling inches from the floor. She opened the book with a surgeon's care and began to read. And just like that, the entire atmosphere of the cold, imposing penthouse shifted. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the quiet rustle of turning pages. The vast space felt a little less like a museum and a little more like a home. Sarah stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do. Julian gestured for her to follow him back to the living area. He had the penthouse's automated system produce coffee for her and a glass of water for himself. "Tell me about her," Julian said, getting straight to the point. Sarah, startled, nearly dropped her cup. "Lily? She's Lily. Very quiet. Very smart. Keeps to herself mostly." "Where did she come from?" Sarah shook her head, her expression troubled. "We don't know. She was found on the steps of a church when she was 2. No note, nothing. She didn't speak for the first year she was with us. We thought she might be mute. Then one day she just started talking in complete sentences." Julian processed this. A blank slate. A child with no past. It only deepened the mystery. "And the things she says?" He prodded gently. "The way she seems to know things about people?" Sarah sighed, a weary sound that spoke of years of thankless work. "That started about a year ago. It's strange. Sometimes it's wonderful. She'll know just what to say to calm down one of the little ones having a nightmare. Other times—" She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "Other times, it's like today. She sees the cracks in people, the sad parts they try to hide, and she just says it. Not to be mean, I don't think. It's more like she's just stating a fact, like the sky is blue, or that boy is hurting because his life is a mess." She looked up at Julian, her eyes pleading for understanding. "She's not a bad kid, Mr. Croft. She's just different. And the world is hard on different." Julian looked down the long corridor toward the library, where the small girl was lost in a world of words. He was hard on different. His entire empire was built on sanding down the edges of the world, making it uniform, predictable, and profitable. But this different was a force of nature. It was something that couldn't be quantified or controlled. He spent the next hour talking to Sarah. He learned about the leaky roof at Elmwood, the ancient, malfunctioning furnace, the constant struggle for funding, the quiet desperation of the staff and children. He listened without interrupting, his mind cross-referencing her anecdotal evidence with the cold, hard data in his files. Everything she said was true, only worse. When it was time for them to leave, Julian walked them to the library. Lily was still engrossed in her book. "Lily, it's time to go," Sarah said softly. Lily looked up, her eyes blinking as if coming out of a dream. A look of profound disappointment crossed her face. "Do I have to?" "Yes, honey. It's getting late." Before she climbed out of the chair, she looked at Julian. "Can I come back?" The question hung in the air. Answering it would mean something. It would be a commitment, a step across a line he had drawn for himself years ago. It would mean letting someone into his world, into his life. He looked at her small, hopeful face, and the carefully constructed fortress around his heart crumbled to dust. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "You can come back tomorrow." He also sent her home with the Shakespeare book. The look on her face as he told her it was hers to keep was worth more than the German tech firm he had just acquired. That night, Julian didn't sleep. He sat in his library, in the chair opposite the one she had occupied, and tried to make sense of the day's events. He had brought a child, a ward of the state, into his home. He had promised she could return. He had interfered in a playground dispute. He had halted a multi-billion-dollar development project. Every single action was a direct contradiction of the principles he had lived by for 15 years. He pulled up the file on Kevin, the bully. It was as ugly as he'd expected. The father was a mid-level manager at a logistics company, recently returned after a 6-month separation. The mother had 2 DUIs. The family was drowning in debt. The boy was acting out the misery he lived in. Julian's first instinct was to destroy them. An anonymous tip to social services, a call to his bank to have their mortgage reviewed. He could shatter their fragile lives with a few keystrokes. It would be easy. It would be just. But then he heard Lily's voice in his mind. "You don't stop a fire by burning down the forest." He closed the file. He opened a different one instead, a list of top-rated family counselors and addiction treatment centers. He flagged 3 of them and sent an encrypted, anonymous message to Marcus. "Set up a trust. Fund a full course of treatment for this family. Make it untraceable." He leaned back in his chair, feeling a strange sense of lightness. It wasn't forgiveness. It was strategy. A different kind of strategy, one that wasn't about winning but about fixing. It felt unnervingly good. The next day, Lily came back. And the day after that. A routine began to form. Sarah would bring her to the penthouse after school. Lily would spend 3 hours in the library reading with a ferocious appetite. She consumed Shakespeare, then moved on to Plato, then to quantum physics, then to Russian literature. Julian would work in his office, the door open, content to just know she was there. Sometimes she would emerge from the library with a question. Why did Ophelia have to die? Is the observer effect real, or is it just a limitation of our measurement tools? If God is all-powerful, can he create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? They were questions that forced Julian to engage parts of his mind that had long been dormant. He found himself looking forward to their strange philosophical discussions. He learned to see the world through her eyes, a place of infinite wonder and baffling contradictions. He also started to subtly change his home. He had a chef prepare actual meals instead of the nutrient paste he usually consumed. He found out Lily liked macaroni and cheese, and soon the penthouse often smelled of baked pasta and melted cheddar. He had a small, child-sized desk and chair installed in the library for her. He bought her a new wardrobe of comfortable clothes to replace her worn-out hand-me-downs. Each change was a small crack in the sterile facade of his life, letting in a little more light, a little more warmth. He also took a more active role in the situation at Elmwood. He dispatched a team of his best structural engineers and architects to do a pro bono assessment of the building. Their report was damning. Faulty wiring, asbestos, black mold, a failing foundation. The place was a death trap. His original plan had been to demolish it. His new plan was more ambitious. He bought the adjacent abandoned warehouse and the 2 empty lots behind it. He sat down with his architects, the same ones who designed his gleaming skyscrapers, and gave them a new project. Design the perfect children's home. I want gardens, he told them, pointing at the satellite maps. I want a library that rivals my own. I want state-of-the-art classrooms, a real kitchen, comfortable rooms, not dormitories. I want a place that feels like a home, not an institution, and I want it done in 6 months. The architects were stunned, but they set to work. The project, codenamed The Nest, became a top priority within Croft Enterprises, baffling everyone in the company. Julian Croft, the ruthless corporate raider, was suddenly obsessed with building an orphanage. One afternoon, as Lily was reading in the library, Julian was on a video call with his board, coldly dismantling their arguments against his new philanthropic venture. He was in his element, a shark among minnows, when Lily appeared at his elbow. She was holding a book open. "What does melancholy mean?" she asked, oblivious to the 20 stunned faces on the giant screen behind him. Julian paused. The entire board held its breath. He looked from their shocked expressions to Lily's curious face. "It means a gentle sadness," he said softly, his tone completely changing. "Like the feeling you get on a rainy Sunday afternoon when you've just finished a really good book." He saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She nodded and went back to the library. Julian turned back to the screen. The faces of his board members were a mixture of confusion and awe. He had never shown this side of himself to anyone. "As I was saying," he continued, his voice once again cold as steel, "your profit projections are irrelevant. The nest will be built. This meeting is over." He ended the call and leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. He was beginning to realize that power wasn't just about destroying things. It could also be about building them. The construction of the nest proceeded at a blistering pace. Julian supervised every detail, from the choice of hypoallergenic paint to the ergonomic design of the classroom chairs. He poured millions into the project without a second thought. During the day, he was a captain of industry. In the afternoons, he was just Julian, the man who talked about books with a little girl named Lily. Their bond deepened. He learned that she had nightmares sometimes, though she would never say what they were about. He learned that her favorite color was the deep blue of the sky just before sunrise. He learned that she possessed a quiet, unshakable sense of justice. She was the moral compass he didn't know he was missing. One day she came out of the library looking troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked. "In this book," she said, holding up a copy of Oliver Twist, "they send the orphans to a workhouse. It's a bad place." "Yes, it was," Julian agreed. "Is Elmwood a workhouse?" The question was so direct, so innocent, it caught him off guard. He thought of the peeling paint, the overworked staff, the constant sense of despair that clung to the place. "No," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "Elmwood is not a workhouse." But he knew it was uncomfortably close, and he was the one who had been planning to tear it down and make its residents homeless. The weight of that decision, a decision he'd made as easily as ordering lunch, settled on him. He had to tell her. "Lily," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I need to show you." He took her to his command center, the room with the holographic displays. He called up the original demolition plans for Northgate Park and the Elmwood block. He showed her the before and the after, the green space and the crumbling brick building replaced by a towering spike of glass and steel. He explained that his company had bought the land, that he had been the one to order the demolition. He told her everything, leaving out no detail of his own cold calculus. He expected her to be angry, to be afraid of him. Instead, she just looked at the hologram, her small face serious. "But you stopped it," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "Yes," he said. "I stopped it." "Why?" He looked at her intelligent eyes, her calm demeanor. He owed her the truth. "Because I saw you," he said. "I saw you in the park. And you were. Interesting. You changed the equation." She seemed to ponder this for a moment. She reached out a small hand and touched the holographic image of the condominium. "It's very tall," she said, "but there's no room for anyone to grow." And in that moment, Julian understood. He hadn't just been building a physical structure. He had been planning to build another monument to his own emptiness, a tall, shiny, and ultimately soulless place. Lily had saved him from more than just a bad real estate deal. She had saved him from himself. The day the nest was completed, Julian took Lily to see it before anyone else. The old, grim facade of Elmwood was gone. In its place was a beautiful, modern complex of buildings surrounded by green lawns and playgrounds. Inside, the rooms were bright and cheerful, filled with new furniture and toys. The library was a two-story rotunda with a domed ceiling painted to look like the night sky. Lily walked through the empty halls, her eyes wide with wonder. She ran her hands over the smooth wooden desks in a classroom, peeked into the gleaming new kitchen, and stood in the center of the library, staring up at the painted constellations. "Is this a palace?" she asked in a hushed voice. "It's a home," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's for you, and for all the other children at Elmwood." "For us?" She looked at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning joy. "But why?" Julian knelt down in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "Because everyone deserves a safe place to grow," he said. "And because you taught me that building things is better than breaking them." She didn't say anything. She just launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. It was the first time she had ever initiated physical contact with him. Julian froze for a second, startled, before his own arms came up to encircle her tiny frame. He held her tightly, burying his face in her riot of dark curls. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt the sting of tears in his eyes. He wasn't just holding a child. He was holding his own rediscovered humanity. The transition of the children from the old Elmwood to the nest was a logistical feat that Julian's team managed with their usual efficiency. But for the children, it was pure magic. They went to sleep one night in their cramped, drab dormitories and woke up the next day being transported to a place that looked like it had been pulled from a fairy tale. The story of the anonymous benefactor who had built the nest became a local legend. The media went into a frenzy, trying to uncover the identity of the mysterious philanthropist. Julian, through Marcus, planted a series of false leads that sent them chasing after retired tech billionaires and eccentric foreign royalty. His own involvement remained a closely guarded secret. His only condition for the gift was that the home's new director be Sarah, the overworked caregiver who had first brought Lily to his door. He knew she would run the place with the compassion and integrity it deserved. With the nest established and thriving, a new, comfortable routine settled in. Lily now lived in a beautiful new room with a window overlooking a garden, but she still came to the penthouse every afternoon. It was their time. They would read, talk, and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence in the library. Julian found that the rest of his empire, the deals and the acquisitions, seemed less important. They were just the means to an end. The end was this: the quiet peace of an afternoon with the little girl who had inexplicably become the center of his universe. But a new problem began to emerge, a bureaucratic one. As Lily got older, the state's Child Services Division began making noises about finding her a permanent placement. They wanted to put her up for adoption, to find her a traditional mother and father family. The idea of some strangers taking Lily away, of her disappearing from his life, was a physical pain for Julian. It was unthinkable. He had Marcus use every legal tool at his disposal to delay the process. They filed motions, requested reviews, buried the case in so much paperwork that it would take years to unravel. But Julian knew it was a temporary solution. The state would eventually win. Unless... The thought first came to him one evening as he was watching Lily sleep on the couch in his library. She had fallen asleep reading a book on astrophysics, her small face peaceful in the soft lamplight. Her presence had transformed his sterile penthouse into a home. He couldn't imagine it without her. The thought was absurd. Him? A father? He was a broken, solitary man who had sealed himself off from the world. What could he possibly offer a child, other than money? He was too old, too set in his ways, too damaged. But as he watched her, he realized he had more to offer than he thought. He could offer her safety. He could offer her knowledge. He could offer her a world of possibilities, and in return she offered him something far more valuable, a reason to exist beyond the accumulation of wealth and power. She offered him love. The next day, he called his legal team. Not his corporate lawyers, but the best family law attorneys in the country. "I want to adopt a child," he said, the words feeling momentous and terrifying. "Her name is Lily." The legal battle was brutal. The state was resistant to the idea of a single, older man with no family and a mysterious, reclusive reputation adopting a child. They saw him as a risk, an unknown quantity. His immense wealth worked against him, making them suspicious of his motives. They sent psychologists to evaluate him, social workers to inspect his home. They dug into his past, exhuming the tragedy of his wife and daughter's death. They tried to use his grief, his subsequent withdrawal from society, as proof that he was unfit. Julian met every challenge with a calm, unshakable resolve. He answered the psychologist's intrusive questions with unnerving honesty. He allowed the social workers to tour his home, which now featured a child's bedroom, painted a soft blue, filled with books and a state-of-the-art telescope. He sat through grueling depositions, his face a mask of calm control. But it was Lily herself who turned the tide. During a closed-court hearing with a family court judge, Lily was asked, in the gentlest way possible, where she wanted to live. The state's attorney expected her to say she wanted to stay at the Nest, the wonderful new home she loved. But Lily, sitting in a large witness chair, looked directly at the judge. "I want to live with Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Why?" the judge asked kindly. "Because he listens," Lily said simply. "He doesn't just hear the words I say. He listens to the questions underneath them. He gave us all a new house, but he gave me a home." She then turned her gaze to Julian, who was sitting at the respondent's table, his hands clenched together. "And," she added, a small smile on her face, "his library is better." The judge, a woman who had seen the worst of humanity in her courtroom, found her own eyes growing misty. She looked at the file in front of her, at the reports detailing Julian's coldness, his isolation, his unsuitability. Then she looked at the fierce devotion in the eyes of the strange, brilliant little girl, and the quiet, desperate hope in the eyes of the broken billionaire. She knew that family was not about a checklist of traditional requirements. It was about love, safety, and a place to belong. "I see no reason to deny this petition," the judge said, her voice firm. Adoption granted. Julian felt the world tilt on its axis. A wave of relief so profound it left him breathless washed over him. He looked at Lily, and she was beaming, a rare, full-wattage smile that lit up the entire stuffy courtroom. He was a father. She was his daughter. His daughter. The word was a miracle. That evening, they didn't celebrate with a fancy party. They went back to the penthouse. Lily changed the nameplate on the door of her room. She had written it herself on a piece of paper in careful, blocky letters. Lily Croft. Julian stood beside her, his heart so full he thought it might burst. Later, they sat in the library, not reading, just talking. "So," Lily said, curling up in her favorite armchair, "now that you're my dad, does that mean you have to tell me what to do?" Julian considered this. "I suppose I could," he said. "I could tell you to eat your vegetables and do your homework and go to bed on time. Are you going to?" He smiled. "No, I'm just going to ask you to keep asking questions. Never stop being curious, and never ever let anyone tell you that you're too different." "Okay," she said, "I can do that." She paused for a moment, then looked at him with that perceptive gaze of hers. "You're different too, you know." "Am I?" "Yes," she said with absolute certainty. "Most people build walls to keep the world out. You built them too, but you also built a door, and you opened it for me." He had no words. He simply reached out and squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the profound truth she had just spoken. The years that followed were a revelation. Julian Croft, the recluse, started to re-engage with the world, but on his own terms. He and Lily traveled, not to business meetings, but to see the Great Pyramids, the Amazon rainforest, the CERN particle accelerator in Switzerland. He took her to museums, to concerts, to lectures by the world's greatest minds. He gave her the world, and she, in return, gave him a reason to live in it. His company changed too. The Croft Foundation, once a tax shelter that handed out token grants, became a global force for good, focusing on education and child welfare. Julian still ran his empire with formidable intelligence, but now his decisions were tempered with a compassion and a foresight that had been absent before. He was no longer just building for profit. He was building for a future he wanted his daughter to inherit. Lily grew from a strange, solemn child into a brilliant, compassionate young woman. Her unsettling perception softened into a profound empathy. She understood people's pain not as a weapon, but as a bridge to connection. She excelled in her studies, eventually earning scholarships to the best universities in the world, though she chose to attend the local university that Julian had endowed with a new, world-class science faculty. She wanted to stay close to home. One crisp autumn evening, nearly 15 years after they had first met, Julian and Lily were walking through Northgate Park. It had not been demolished. Instead, Julian had bought it outright and turned it into a public trust, forever protected from developers. It was more beautiful than ever, with new gardens and a recently renovated playground. They stopped by the pond where her book had been destroyed so long ago. "Do you remember that day?" Julian asked quietly. Lily smiled, a warm, knowing expression. "Of course. The day I met the scary man in the expensive suit." "Was I scary?" "A little," she admitted. "You were so quiet, like a building with all the lights off. I wasn't sure if anyone was home." Julian looked out over the water, the setting sun glinting on its surface. "There wasn't," he said, his voice raw with the memory of his own emptiness. "Not for a long time. You turned the lights back on, Lily." She slipped her arm through his, her head resting on his shoulder. She was almost as tall as he was now. "We turned them on together," she corrected him gently. They stood there in comfortable silence, Two people from impossibly different worlds who had found in each other the missing pieces of their own souls. The reclusive millionaire and the orphan girl with the strange gift had built a life together, not on a foundation of wealth or power, but on the simple, unshakable truth that the greatest investment one can ever make is in another human being. A family is not something you are born into. It is something you build. One act of love, one moment of understanding, one shared glance at a time. It is the quiet, unbreakable promise to be the light in another's darkness and to allow their light to illuminate your own. And in the heart of the city that Julian Croft no longer sought to own, but to nurture, that light shone brighter than any skyscraper.